All right, guys, this is the moment of truth right here. So this brisket's been cooking for, again, I think it was about 14 hours or so. But we're gonna get ready to slice this thing up and just kind of see what it looks like on the moist end and the lean end. Open this thing up and see what it looks. All right, so you guys can see here, you got a beautiful, beautiful brisket, man. Really happy with the color. If you can see how that camera hopefully is capturing how much, everyone does that jiggle test or whatever. But here it is, guys. And like I was talking about during the last cook video, this corner was a little bit curled up. And remember, we had a little bit of moisture right here, but it's laying flat now. This part there's no flexing anymore. It's nice and even with the rest of the brisket. Even the bottom of the brisket right there, it's got good color. Nothing's falling apart. There are some fibers that are kind of breaking a little bit, but that's normal. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the brisket and how it goes. But ooh. All right, let's get cutting this brisket. So what I'm using today, this is another Dexter knife. This is a 12-inch serrated slicing knife. Even though this brisket has been resting overnight, it's still super soft. You can tell, like, when we were poking at it and when I was flipping it, I almost dropped the thing. There's still so much jiggle in it that we want something that's going to slice through it really nice and easily. So I wouldn't put a chef knife to the brisket because you're gonna end up putting so much pressure on it. You're gonna end up squishing it a little bit. So, even though you only have this knife, I only really use this knife, just to cut brisket and ribs and just barbecue just in general. But this is something that I would, if you're gonna cook briskets and you want to have those slices, go get yourself a serrated knife. It doesn't cost that much, and it's just gonna make your product a lot better. I'm gonna start with this end of this lean end right here, and let's just see how we did. All right. The other thing too, and I'm sure you guys have heard it in Franklin videos all the time, is this is not something where we're curling our knuckles and going against it like you're cutting other things. We're leaving our hand flat like this and kind of using our thumb as kind of like, when you're cutting regular stuff, you're using that front knuckle. We're using the side of our thumb to do that. The other thing too is that while we're cutting this up, we're using our hand here to help keep things in place. That even though, let's say our brisket might be a little slightly overcooked or whatever, it's all right. As long as you can still get it sliced, it'll still eat fine. We just want to make sure that as we're doing that this hand right here is going to kind of keep that pressure from, as we're trying to get good, clean slices. That's not going to jiggle too much as we're slicing it. Like, this will kind of keep it stable. All right. So let's see what this end cut looks like. All right, so that looks pretty good. We got that fat cap right there. It's nice and rendered, and it's super moist. You can kind of see that right there, and that fiber is just breaking. So, those are the kind of nuggets that people try to give out and stuff like that. But to me, man, that's pretty good. So we'll save that on the sides right there. And let's get into slicing some of these leans. And again, so these slices, and I think there are certain measurements, and I think, Franklin says big pencil, small pencil. It really depends on your brisket and especially what kind of purpose you're using it for. For me, typically, if I'm just giving slices on a tray, yeah, I'll go by that, small pencil or whatever thickness that is. You're just eyeballing, honestly. You just really want a decent slice that, it's not a deli sandwich where you want to get razor thin slices where it's going to pack on, pile on a sandwich. It's still kind of like when you're eating a piece of steak. You want a slice that's going to have some structure, some substance to it. So that's all we're trying to do. We're just eyeballing it. Okay. And these slices are looking really, really good. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I was really nervous last night. When I was waiting for this brisket to come off, but man, I mean, that is just beautiful. It's the thickness, it's not too super thick. The lean end right here is breaking just a tad, but it's all good. That bend test everyone does, it's not breaking. That fat cap is still there, it's still intact. Breaks really nice and easily. Let's give it a taste test. It's really good. The salt's there. Even with a little extra pepper, it's not super peppery. Tastes really good, guys. I would say I might have added, I could add maybe just a hair more salt, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with the seasoning right there. All right. Now, before we, instead of slicing through this entire, actually, let's just do it anyway. I'll just fast forward through this part. So this is kind of that lean slice that I think most people are looking for. It's kind of like the closest that you're going to get to that moist end without getting, without being too lean. There's a little more fat on here, so you can kind of see that glisten on that slice. It is starting to break a little bit, but you know what? It still looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to push these leans aside. All right, so let's get to that moist end. So you guys remember that heel fat that we were cutting out? That was like kind of like that first step, and we were trimming it. It's some of it's still kind of there. So if I flip to the bottom right here, you can kind of see that little line. That's still some of that heel fat. So we don't want to serve that. So we're gonna go off to the side right here at an angle and just cut out that fat. You know, people are like, "Oh, why are you cutting that off? Why is it so?" Like, you're cutting off the good part. This is just fat, guys. So when you use, you know, you'll see guys at barbecue restaurants complaining that they want this. You don't want this. All right. Okay. Now, next on this end right here. This is kind of like that, you know, people are asking for burn ends and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of where it's coming from. At least for like Texas style barbecue, we don't really do, I think most people when they ask for burn ends, they're asking for like the Kansas City chunk burn ends. We don't really do that in Texas style barbecue. So this is kind of like if people are asking for burn ends, it's coming from right underneath that hump, that smooth side. This is where that hump side was. And this side we're gonna cut a little bit thicker just because it's super thin slices, and this part right here, it just doesn't really work. So even though you'll see my slices here are gonna be slightly thinner than this chunk in the end, yeah, I'm gonna take this one off in a little bit bigger chunk because it just doesn't make very good slices for it. Okay. So that's our first slice of that moist end. You can see it's glistening. There's a lot of marbling in there, and so this is kind of the one where you can kind of chunk it into little cubes, or you can do into cubes, or you can do into these kind of long strips like that. So it's just kind of depending on what you're looking for, how many pieces you want to serve, how you want it to look. It's really up to you. You know, as a cutter, you know, it's really up to you to decide how you want those slices to look, how thick you want them to be. Depending on how the cook went, you're really determining, you know, is it better to cut it a little bit thinner, a little thicker? Like, your hands are the ones that are going to determine, you know, what the customer gets to see. So. All right, here we go. So this is our moist brisket right here, guys. Oh man, it looks pretty good. So you can see that fibers right there, it's a lot bigger, a lot coarser, and there's marbling still in between those slices right there. You know, that's what we're looking for. We want that fat still in there, and that's a hard thing. We don't want to end up, because the leans do take a little bit longer. That's kind of the thing that finishes the latest. That we don't want to cook out all this fat that's in here because we're trying to get that lean to be nice and soft. Sometimes, you know, most people are looking for this fatty brisket. I would rather have that fatty end be perfect, that lean end be a little bit under, and maybe serve those slices of that lean end for sandwiches instead. So, you know, just really depends on, you know, you gotta feel for what you think is more important and what you're gonna sacrifice in that sacrifice in those slices of brisket, guys. All right, guys, well, that's the last of our brisket videos. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I just wanted to do a quick recap just on the cook overall, and just kind of give a little small tips that you can use throughout the cook if you run into some issues. Just a quick recap, I think that overall the cook went pretty good. You know, the only thing that I think I would have changed is, like I said, I think I could have put more rub on there. The salt was a little bit light on it, but you know, you can always sprinkle a little bit of salt on top of those slices as well, and still get that flavor back. You know, I wish I picked a better day to cook. You know, it was pretty difficult to finish off these briskets when, you know, the high is 26, and then when the sun goes down, it drops down to 19. So I could have planned better for that, but in general, I thought the cook went pretty well. There wasn't too many issues in terms of things I was looking for that didn't happen, but like I said, the one thing that you know is going to change depending on your pit is going to be temperature. And that's the one thing that I didn't really talk about too much in the last video, is, you know, what temp to cook at and stuff like that, only because, you know, like I said, my pit does tend to cook a little bit hotter in general, but because of the weather yesterday, I did have to bump up the temp at least about 10-15 degrees than I normally would. But let me give you guys just a template for me if I'm picking a, you know, anywhere between a 12 to a 14 pound brisket or so. I generally think I can get the brisket done within 12 hours. So for me, that 12-hour mark is going to look something like being at a temperature of like 250 for the first 3 hours or so. And then during that time, what I'm looking for is that you know, the brisket is starting to get some color, that the bark is starting to set a little bit, and that you know, if that corner, like I said, that's really thin on that lean and does to curl up, I just want to make sure it's not curling up too fast. During that time, if it does curl up too fast, then I know that, hey, for my next cook, I have to know that that 250 is probably too high of a temp for my brisket. So the next time I cook, you know, instead of cooking at 250, I'll drop it to about, you know, 240 or so, just to see what happens. And then after that, I'll probably bump up my temp to about 265, 270 or so for the next, you know, 5 to 6 hours, and that'll give us a total cook time at that point about 8 to 9 hours or so. Now at that time, what I'm looking for to happen is I want to get a much darker color. I want to make sure that the fat in the top is starting to render. That if there is any pooling of fat or liquid on top of the brisket, that I'm taking my brisket every once in a while to make sure that liquid doesn't pile up. Because if it does happen, I think I talked about last time that you know, that seasoning will wash off because it's just sitting in liquid. So we don't want that to happen. Just we can have a nice even colored bark all the way through. And then usually probably around the 9 or 10 hour mark or so, I'll, you know, if it feels like it's a little bit behind, then I might bump it up for another 10 degrees. But for the most part, I'll maintain that temp, and then around the 10-hour mark or so, or like the last 30 minutes of that 10-hour mark, I'll bump up the temp a little bit hotter. So the reason why I'm bumping up hotter then is, like I said, I want to render out that fat as much as possible before I get into paper. So that, and then when we wrap the brisket up, it's going to be hopefully around a 2 to 2.5 hour mark. Maybe if it's a little larger brisket, or if you're a little bit inconsistent with your temperatures, it might be 3 hours being wrapped. And during that time, I'll probably bump up the temp to about 290 to 300, kind of somewhere around that range. What we're doing at that point is, you know, our brisket has been cooking for a while, but now we're trying to just kind of plow through the cook and make sure that all that extra toughness in that brisket is starting to break down. So we do need higher temps in that case. If you keep it at that low 275, you're going to end up with a 15-16 hour cook, even if you have perfect conditions outside, just because it just needs an extra bump in heat. So again, even though I'm using the temps of 250, 275, and 300, yours might be, you know, 240, 260, and 280. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I didn't want to tell you guys specific temperatures to go off of, because your pit might be different, and you're gonna have to figure out, you know, what temp is too hot, and you know, at what time or what temp does your brisket start to curl too fast and stuff like that. So one of the indications that you can use, or tools that you can use to figure out, you know, what temp is too hot for your pit, and that's when I use a spritz bottle or any kind of liquid just to kind of throw in the grates. Like I said, I don't really spritz too often. I'll do it if, you know, if it did get a little bit too hot, and you know, I see that brisket curl up really quick, or if I see that, you know, for whatever reason, my bark looks really, really dry. But other than that, the thing that I use this most for is that if I'm working on a new pit, or I'm working at, I don't really know what temperatures to cook on those pits just yet, the spritz bottle is a really good way to, as a good indication that if you spray the grate and it starts to sizzle, that to me is the temp that's too hot for it to, you know, to kind of have it sit there without burning. So something that might happen is, you'll see this a lot in like other YouTube videos of guys cooking briskets, and they're spritzing their briskets every hour or two, and when they do that, you hear a lot of sizzle. And what that's telling me is that it's too hot for that pit, and what tends to happen with those briskets is it might look really pretty on top, but when they go into finish and slicing up the briskets, the top might be really good, and they get to the bottom to, you know, finish that slice, and you'll hear like a slight crunch, or the fibers are starting to dry out and it gets really stringy at the bottom. So I would say the sizzle is kind of the temp that you want to use when for that last 30 minutes of rendering out that fat before wrap, and also that should also be your wrap temp as well. So again, if you're trying to determine what is that wrap temperature for your pit, I would say whatever temperature it causes your grates to sizzle is a pretty good indication of what that temp should be. Also, if that brisket does curl up or whatever, then, you know, you saw in my other videos, you just kind of use that foil to tint those corners. You don't always have to do it. Like I said, I was trying to avoid that entire situation by having a really good trim on the brisket, guys. So anyway, that's it. You know, obviously there's a lot of factors that go into cooking a brisket, and I can't tell you how many times I have ruined briskets over the years through the trim, through the cooking process, and also through, you know, cutting like what we did today. So there's a lot of like a lot of factors. There's a lot of places where things could go wrong, but as long as you know what you're trying to hit, and you have all these kind of markers to know that your brisket is on track to finish, then you're good to go. And it's gonna get better and better as time goes on. So just have fun with it. Make sure you guys have enough people who are around to eat the food that you're making, and you know, you're just gonna get better and better over time, guys. So you guys, if you guys have any questions on any of the 3 videos that I did, any questions about what I was talking about just now, leave in the comments. You know, like, subscribe, share these videos with other barbecue people. Also, I'm thinking about doing a rib video as well, but I mean, I had fun making this video. I'm just still very uncomfortable talking to my phone and recording this stuff, but I do plan on making more videos, not all just cook videos, but let me know what you guys think, what you guys want to see, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, who wants to eat this brisket? Because honestly, I'm sick of eating barbecue.